Have you ever lost the one thing you built your entire life around, felt it hit you like a collapse from the inside, and still kept your face completely still so nobody would notice? Not because you were okay, not because it didn't matter, but because somewhere along the way you learned that being visibly hurt was dangerous, that needing too much, wanting too much, feeling too much would only make things worse. That's Tigress. And I really think that changes the way you see her, because on the surface, her story looks simple. She's disciplined, she's intense, she's the strongest fighter in the room until Po shows up and takes the title that seemed destined for her. So the easy read is jealousy, pride, bitterness, the talented student who got passed over. And sure, some of that is there. But that's the shallow version. The deeper version is a lot more uncomfortable, because it has less to do with losing a title and more to do with what that title meant to her in the first place. Tigress was never just training to become great. She was training to become acceptable. That starts way before the Jade Palace, before the Furious Five, before she ever looked like a master. She starts as a child no one knows how to hold. Not a bad child, not a cruel child, just a child with too much force in her body and no safe place to put it. She's strong enough to scare people before she's old enough to understand what fear looks like on someone else's face. And that's such a brutal thing for a kid to learn early, that your natural self enters a room before you do, and people tense up around it. So she gets separated, watched, managed. When you're young, you don't hear adults describe you as difficult or dangerous or too much and think, maybe they're limited, maybe they're scared, maybe they don't understand me. No, you hear it and turn it inward. You make it into identity. You think, this must be what I am. That's the first wound. Not failure, not rejection in the ordinary sense. Something deeper. The feeling that your very nature creates distance. That love, safety, belonging, all of it might be conditional on how well you can edit yourself. Then Shifu shows up, and for the first time, someone doesn't flinch. That matters. More than anything. He sits with her. He teaches her patience through something fragile. Tiny dominoes in the paw of someone who has spent her whole life breaking things by accident. And there's something almost painfully gentle about that image, because what he's really teaching her isn't just control. He's teaching her that force can be softened, that she doesn't have to be feared forever. But here's where it gets tragic. By the time Tigress really becomes his student, Shifu is already carrying the wreckage of Tai Lung. And broken teachers don't always look broken. Sometimes they look disciplined, focused, principled. Sometimes what they call structure is just fear with better posture. So Tigress gets taken in, but she doesn't exactly get met. She gets trained, corrected, refined, shaped. Not because Shifu is heartless, but because he is terrified of what happens when devotion turns into attachment and potential turns into disaster. Tai Lung taught him that. Tigress pays for it. That's what makes her story so sad. She does everything right and still grows up inside emotional distance she didn't earn. And when you're a kid, you don't understand the adult context. You don't know you're standing in the shadow of someone else's mistake. You just feel the absence. You feel the gap between how hard you're trying and how little warmth comes back. So she trains harder. Of course she does. What else is she supposed to do with that kind of ache? She turns it into routine. She turns it into excellence. She turns it into a body so controlled it almost stops looking alive. She becomes the most impressive person in the room by learning how to need nothing from anyone in it. That's why I don't think her story is really about ambition. Ambition is part of it, but ambition doesn't fully explain that level of relentless control. This is about bargaining. It's about a child making a silent deal with the world. I will become flawless, and in return, you won't send me away. I will become useful, disciplined, exceptional, and maybe then I get to stay. Maybe then I get to belong. And once you see that, the Dragon Warrior moment stops being a professional disappointment and starts feeling like a psychological disaster. Because it wasn't just a reward she wanted, it was proof. Proof that all the years meant something. Proof that the pain converted into value. Proof that the self she built out of restraint and labor and sacrifice was finally enough. And then the title goes to Po. Not to someone more polished. Not to someone who outtrained her. to a panda who stumbles into the arena, crashes into destiny by accident, and somehow gets chosen anyway. Imagine what that does to a person like Tigress, because Po doesn't just take the title, he violates the rule her whole identity was built on. He is clumsy, emotional, impulsive, loud, hungry, weird, visibly sincere, completely unrefined. He is everything she learned not to be, and somehow the universe opens for him. That kind of thing doesn't just make you angry, it makes you feel insane. Because if he can be chosen while being fully himself, then what exactly was all your suffering for? That's why her reaction is so revealing. She doesn't explode, she doesn't demand justice, she doesn't throw a fit, she goes colder, tighter, sharper. And that matters, because coldness is often what pain looks like in people who were never allowed to be messy. She doesn't fight for the title directly because some part of her already expected this. The loss lands too cleanly, too familiarly, like confirmation. That's not what simple jealousy looks like. That's what an old belief looks like when reality finally says it out loud. You were never really enough, and the hardest part is that she doesn't say that sentence. She lives it. Look at the way she goes after Po. She doesn't mock him in the broad, obvious ways she could. She doesn't focus on the surface level stuff as much as she could have. She goes straight for belonging. She tells him he doesn't belong there, that he isn't a real warrior, that his presence is a disgrace. That is not random cruelty. That is targeted panic. She attacks the exact place where her own sense of self is weakest, because when people are guarding an unhealed wound, they usually hit others near the bruise. She's saying to him what she has spent her whole life trying not to hear said back to her. You shouldn't be in this room. And that's where her story becomes painfully human, because a lot of people know this pattern, even if they've never had language for it. Not ordinary self-doubt, not just insecurity about your competence, something stranger than that. You can be capable and still feel fundamentally counterfeit. You can do everything well and still feel like your existence in the room depends on performance. That if you stop being impressive for even a second, people will finally notice the original version of you and decide they were right to be uneasy all along. People call a lot of that imposter syndrome, but I think this runs deeper. Imposter syndrome says, I'm not as skilled as people think. This is more like, the skilled version is the costume, and I don't know whether there's anyone lovable underneath it. That's not just performance anxiety, that's identity damage. Psychology has language for this. The false self. The version of you built to survive environments where your natural reactions, emotions, or intensity didn't feel safe. The edited self. The manageable self. The self that keeps the peace. The one that learned to enter rooms softly, monitor its tone, pre-chew its own feelings, and never ask for too much. And the worst part is, it often works. People do respond better. They call you mature, easygoing, chill, strong. You get praised for being low maintenance, when the truth is, you just got good at disappearing in socially acceptable ways. You become admired for the very adaptation that cut you off from yourself. That's Tigress. She isn't only strong, she is edited. And then Po shows up as the opposite of an edited person. He's awkward but open, unformed but genuine. He doesn't know how to sculpt himself into what the room expects, so he just keeps arriving as himself. At first, that makes him look ridiculous, but eventually, it becomes his strength. Shifu learns how to teach him through joy instead of fear, through appetite, instinct, rhythm, play. Not by crushing what makes him different, but by working with it. Think about how radical that must be for Tigress to witness. Because she gave up spontaneity to survive. She gave up softness to be taken seriously. She gave up visible need to remain respectable. And here's this panda, somehow becoming powerful without amputating the parts of himself that make him who he is. No wonder she struggles with him. He doesn't just threaten her position, he threatens her worldview. But what makes her arc so good is that she changes. Slowly, quietly, in tiny movements that would be easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. That bow at the end of the first film matters because it isn't just respect for Po's victory. It's the beginning of surrendering an old belief. He earned his place, yes, but not in the way she understands earning. He proved something she didn't know was possible, that authenticity can become strength, that being enough and being yourself might not be opposites after all. And once that idea enters the system, even a little, it starts cracking everything. By the second film, you can feel the difference. She's still controlled, still guarded, still Tigress. But the wall isn't airtight anymore. There's space for concern, space for tenderness. That hug is one of the most important moments in her entire story because she starts by moving the old way. Physical, direct, intense. Everyone assumes she's about to lash out. Instead, she holds on. And in that one gesture, you can feel years of silence straining against the surface. She doesn't give some polished speech. She doesn't suddenly become a different person. She just lets care exist without disguising it as correction. That's huge. Because for someone like Tigress, affection is dangerous unless it can be justified. Vulnerability feels unsafe unless it serves a function. So when she comforts Poe without making it transactional, that's growth on a soul level. That's not softness replacing strength. That's strength finally allowing softness to live beside it. And by the third film, the shift is even clearer. The old Tigress would rather die proving herself than retreat and ask for help. The older version of her understands something more important. Proving yourself is not always the same as doing what matters. So when Kai tears through everyone and she survives, she doesn't stay behind to make some glorious last stand. She runs to warn Poe. She chooses responsibility over pride, relationship over performance, the mission over the image. That is a completely different person than the child who thought perfection was the price of being allowed to stay. And maybe that's why her story hits so hard, because most people don't become false versions of themselves all at once. It happens in tiny edits. A comment here, a laugh there. One moment of embarrassment that teaches you to reduce your volume. One room where you were too intense, too emotional, too talkative, too needy, too weird, too honest. You don't make some dramatic decision. You just start trimming, then refining, then anticipating. Then one day somebody asks what you really think, and there's this strange blank space where the answer should be. That's the grief in stories like this. Not just the pain of being misunderstood, the pain of realizing how early you began cooperating with the misunderstanding. How long you've lived inside a version of yourself designed to keep other people comfortable, and how frightening it is to imagine stepping outside of it when everyone around you only knows the edited draft. Because that's the real fear, isn't it? Not just, what if I drop the armor? But who's left if I do? And will anyone stay long enough to find out? That's why the answer can't be some shallow line about being yourself. That sounds nice, but it skips the hardest part. People build armor for reasons, usually good reasons, usually necessary reasons. You don't survive by accident. The deeper lesson is gentler than that. Sometimes healing starts when someone notices the armor and doesn't punish you for wearing it. They don't rip it off. They don't demand instant vulnerability. They just stay, long enough for you to test a different way of being, long enough for you to let one unscripted thought finish itself, long enough for the person underneath all that management to peek out and realize the room didn't collapse. That's what Poe gives Tigress without even trying to. Not a cure. Not a rescue, just a living example that there might be another way to exist, one where your value isn't purchased through self-erasure. And that's why her story lingers. Because beneath all the action and discipline in martial arts mythology, Tigress is carrying a question a lot of people know by heart. If I stop performing the acceptable version of myself, will there still be a place for me here? Her arc doesn't answer that with a speech. It answers it with a crack in the mask, a bow, a hug, a warning delivered instead of a sacrifice attempted. Small moments, human moments, the kind that matter because they don't announce themselves. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with. Not just that Tigress was strong. Everybody saw that. It's that she was shaped by fear, disciplined into distance, and still slowly found her way back toward connection. Not by becoming less powerful, but by no longer treating power as the only thing that made her worth keeping. She spent years believing she had to earn the right to take up space. Then life put someone in front of her who took up space badly, loudly, imperfectly, and was loved anyway. That kind of truth can crack open a whole identity. So if any part of this feels familiar, maybe that's why. Maybe the reason Tigress lands so deeply isn't because she reminds us of ambition. Maybe it's because she reminds us of adaptation, of the selves we built to survive, of how hard it is to tell the difference between maturity and self-erasure when people praise you for both. And once you notice that in her, you start noticing it everywhere.